Hey guys, Greg here in the, I think of this as either the staff meeting room or the session. Really, I think of this as the session room. And this is the only way to look at this room that has something relatively pretty. So we've got our logo on the wall. I wanted you to see that, reminding you of our core values. Christ at the center, right? Going forward in faithfulness, finding true north, and then making ripples. Kind of cool logo. Really like how that came up with, and it's not at all different from the other one that we had before, except it totally is. Anyway, so we are in like the 19th or 45th or something episode of The Hike, and we're just plowing through John, doing the deep dive. And we're on chapter 7 now. And just want to remind you, chapter 6, 2 miracles. And then the bread of life teaching or sermon, which kind of dissolved church membership for Jesus. People did not like what he had to say. So, as I said last week, church consultants would be horrified by that sermon. They'd encourage him to get out in front of it, apologize with appropriate amounts of sadness and shame. And Jesus doesn't do any of that. He just plows ahead into chapter 7. And I think of this chapter as conflict and questions. And it is so relevant to our lives, so very relevant to our lives, especially if you do any kind of leadership. Now, when I think of leadership, it's just influence. So if you're a mom or a dad or a friend, you are a leader if you are exercising influence. But leadership is not easy, and this chapter makes it so clear. So conflict and questions in this chapter. I'd like you to camp out in this chapter for a week. Maybe do 2 paragraphs at a time. Work through the 5 questions. You remember what they are. What does this passage tell me about God, who God is? What does this passage tell me about what it is to be human, who I am? What does this passage tell me about my relationships, my connections, either with God or with others? What does this passage tell me about what I fear? And boy, do we fear conflict. So I've already told you this passage is about conflict and fear, or conflict and questions. And so you can bet question 4, what does this passage tell me about what I fear? It's going to be a big one that you can spend a lot of time thinking about. And the 5th question, what does this passage tell me about success? Unfortunately, I think that answer is persevere. Perseverance is success. So, anyway, one of the reasons I'm in here in room 5 is because this is a place when we gather together as a staff and as a session, as elders, where good people, please hear me, good people disagree. So sometimes we think of disagreements of good people and bad people. This is where good people disagree, and we have conflict, and we don't know what to do with it, and it makes us feel things we don't like and stuff like that. But anyway, here in chapter 7, just look through it. So just doing a quick look, verse 1, he's talking to his brothers, not his disciples, but his real, honest to goodness, family of origin brothers. And we're told in verse 1 that the Jews, the leadership of the Jewish people, want to kill Jesus. We're told in verse 7 that the world hates Jesus. In verse 12, we see complaint going on. And all this kind of energy, emotion. If you look at this passage, you'll find out that the word kill comes up 4 times, at least in the New Revised Standard Version. And the word arrest comes up 4 times. The word hate comes up a couple times. These are not words that we often associate with Jesus. But I don't know if you're like me. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "Can't this be easier?" I feel like I say that to myself at least twice a week, sometimes twice a day. Can't this be easier? Why the obstacles? Why the difficulties? Well, take some heart. Because if you're trying to raise a child well, or care for a parent well, or influence someone a bit younger than you well, it's not easy. It's full of conflict and misunderstanding. And just know that Jesus experienced that too. And so, anyway, this first hike through chapter 7, we're going to do a second hike through chapter 7, and then we're moving on to 8. But this first hike, I want you to think about what this tells us about our fear of conflict. We shouldn't fear it. It should be part of what it is to be a leader. It was part of what it was to be a leader for Jesus, and it's part of what it is to be for us. Change is hard, and there will be people who really dislike you, maybe even hate you, as the text says, for wanting to affect positive change. Just know, if it was hard for Jesus, it's probably going to be hard for us. And so let's not fear it. Let's not be surprised by it. But dive in. Ask yourself, how would it be to be Jesus? What would it be to be the Son of God and hated? What would it be to have your brothers not get who you are or what you're about? Your brothers are offering counsel to you, kind of teaching you, patronizing. Just imagine, just walk in your Savior's shoes and ask yourself, what would it have felt like? Was he tempted to throw up his hands and say, "Can't this be easier?" Or worse yet, just give up? Get into the text. Walk a few miles. Take care, and we'll see you in a couple days.